The Terminator franchise is one of the most iconic action franchises of all time, but there hasn't been a new installment since Terminator Dark Fate in 2019. Recently, director James Cameron discussed his desire for a new reboot. Cameron, who created the franchise and directed the original and its sequel, spoke about its future during an appearance on Wondery and Amazon's Smartless podcast. Cameron stated that if a new Terminator film were to be made, he would like to focus on Skynet's side rather than just the fact that Terminators are on the rampage. If I were to do another Terminator film and maybe try to restart that franchise, which is being discussed but nothing has been decided, Cameron said, I would make it much more about the AI side of it than bad robots gone crazy. It's also worth noting that talks are underway to restart the franchise. Previously, Terminator Dark Fate was rumored to be the start of a new trilogy of Terminator films. However, the film was a box office failure and was critically panned, resulting in the cancellation of future film plans. So, did the failure of Terminator Salvation kill the franchise's potential? The sequel Terminator Salvation attempted to reinvent the Terminator franchise, but its failure resulted in the franchise endlessly repeating itself. While Terminator Salvation was not a complete failure, the underwhelming response to the sequel may have led to the Terminator franchise taking fewer risks, ultimately dooming the series. Critics panned the post-apocalyptic war film Terminator Salvation when it was released in 2009. Roger Ebert criticized the film's repetitive, predictable plot. The Hollywood Reporter lamented the absence of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and both the Los Angeles Times and the USA Today panned Christian Bale's performance. However, Terminator Salvation was not a complete flop, with the film performing reasonably well at box office. However, the sequel demonstrated the audiences did not want a new twist on the franchise's existing formula, which may have ultimately doomed the Terminator films as a whole. Every subsequent Terminator sequel, from director Tim Miller's troubled Terminator Dark Fate to the disastrous Terminator Genesis, avoided Terminator Salvation's attempts to explore new genres within the franchise. This conservative approach, ironically, earned these later Terminator films even worse reviews. Let's take a look at how Terminator Salvation altered the franchise formula. Terminator Salvation was always meant to be a significant departure for the franchise. The post-apocalyptic story was a strange riff on Apocalypse Now in its original, darker script, in which Marcus, the hero of Terminator Salvation, sought out a mysterious, mythical John Connor. The conclusion of this draft originally revealed that Marcus was a Terminator, unbeknownst to him, a plot twist that could have changed the franchise by tricking viewers into empathizing with one of its villains. While Terminator Salvation kept this twist in its shooting script 9, the sequel split its focus between Marcus and John, depriving the revelation of its intended impact. However, this does not imply that Terminator Salvation failed to change the franchise's status quo. The first 3 Terminator films all followed a relatively simple formula that Terminator Salvation deviated from. Those first installments were all set in the present or very near future, followed human heroes evading Skynet Terminators, and were all chase thrillers built around extended action sequences. In contrast, Terminator Salvation followed a diverse cast of characters in a post-apocalyptic future, some of whom were humans and some of whom were cybernetic. The darker director's cut of Terminator Salvation relied even more heavily on these elements rather than a theatrical version, but it was firmly a war film rather than a chase thriller in terms of genre. Now let's break it down even further. A variety of factors contributed to Terminator Salvation's failure. For one thing, Christian Bale's on-set rants famously overshadowed the film's publicity tour, and Terminator Salvation was undeniably slow in comparison to the series' first 2 installments. Furthermore, some critics complained that Terminator Salvation didn't feel like a legitimate entity in the franchise canon due to the absence of Arnold Schwarzenegger's primary role in the story. Ironically, Bale claimed Schwarzenegger's Terminator character was out of date and no longer had a role in the series, a controversial claim at the time, but one that was arguably proven true since. Later Terminator films such as Terminator Dark Fate and Terminator Genesis attempted to reintroduce Schwarzenegger's T-800 as a central character. However, the former's critical failure and the latter's disastrous box office performance quickly demonstrated that it was not the case with Terminator Salvation. In retrospect, Terminator Salvation's failure could more reasonably be blamed on its confusing story and ambiguous focus. For significant portions of the sequel's plot, Marcus is the hero, but since Christian Bale's casting as John Connor resulted in that role being expanded, it's never clear who the main character is. Christian Bale was originally set to play Marcus, a much more fitting role for the actor who could have saved Terminator Salvation. To be honest, Terminator Salvation might have saved the franchise. If Christian Bale had played John Connor in Terminator Salvation, the film could have kept its original darker script and minimized John Connor's role. The revelation that Marcus was a cyborg would have been much more impactful, while also giving Terminator Salvation a clearer focus and one definitive lead character rather than two. Furthermore, thanks to this streamlined story, Terminator Salvation could have reintroduced some of the missing subplots. Terminator Salvation famously cut a significant amount of footage from the final cut, including an alternate ending, more action sequences, and a greater involvement of Helena Bonham Carter's villain, Serena Kogan. Serena Kogan, who appears in the final cut of Terminator Salvation, is underutilized in the film. The character was originally intended to be an empathetic anti-villain who began using Skynet's cybernetics to treat her terminal cancer. She, like Marcus, humanized the evil megacorporation and justified Skynet's creation of unstoppable killing machines by reminding viewers that the company once gave people hope. Serena, like Marcus, was an attempt to complicate the Terminator franchise's black and white morality, and her minor role in the finished film highlights Terminator Salvation's biggest failure. Terminator Salvation played it too safe. If the sequel had been a success, Terminator Salvation's director would have planned a trilogy of films to continue the story. Unfortunately, this level of ambition is missing from the muddled, unevenly finished film. The production of Terminator Salvation was a case of studio executives, creatives and producers abandoning the story they wanted to tell in order to include more of the elements they assumed viewers would want from the sequel. Because producers insisted on introducing more high-octane action to match the tone of the previous Terminator films, a thoughtful meditation on the line between man and machine became an action-heavy thriller. Because Marcus, the morally ambiguous hero, was the most recognizable character in the franchise, he was transformed into the straightforward good guy John Connor. It's unclear whether another Terminator reboot could save the franchise. However, any future additions to the franchise must consider Terminator Salvation's failure as a cautionary tale. The original pitch for Terminator Salvation may have allowed the franchise to branch out into other genres and explore different tones within the same fictional universe. However, due to a fear of the unknown, Terminator Salvation crammed the original Terminator formula into a post-apocalyptic war story, dooming its even weaker sequels to repeat this mistake. The next Terminator must correct one fatal sequel villain mistake to be a blockbuster. The next Terminator villain must be terrifying. The original Terminator is iconic for many reasons, including Arnold Schwarzenegger's icy performance as the T-800, which Sting rejected. The first installment is commonly referred to as a slasher, which is an apt description. Although he employs firearms rather than knives, the T-800, like Michael Myers, is an unstoppable killer in a rubber mask. He, like Robert Patrick's T-1000, is a terrifying creation. The liquid metal villain is a terrifying creation, and Cameron wisely frames many of its scenes as horror set pieces, such as the murder of John Connor's foster parents. The T-X, Kristanna Loken, was a dull combination of the T-800 and T-1000. Jason Clarke's T-3000 was far too hammy, with an overly busy design, and Dark Fate's Rev 3 was simply forgettable. Meanwhile, Salvation made no attempt to create a central antagonist. The Terminator should evoke terror as well as chaos, but focusing on the latter in later sequels was a huge mistake. The next Terminator reboot must focus on this issue and remember what made the first entries so successful.